Welcome to Successful Interviewing, a workshop presented by WorkSource Spokane. Anytime you see an employer that is hiring, you can deduce that they are lacking workers and are shorthanded. Therefore, they have a heavy workload and are seeking someone to help with that. Someone with the skills that will generate net positive value. The value of their production will be greater than the cost of employing them. They will also look to see whether the candidate is a fit within the organization because a positive attitude, working well with teammates, and fitting in well with a culture can contribute to the overall effectiveness of a team. The primary thing that employers seek is a candidate with passion for the particular job. You can see from this chart that a candidate may possess more qualifications for a position, but if they have less passion than their competition, an employer may choose to go with a less skilled but more passionate candidate because positive attitude and motivation typically translate into higher productivity. We know that interview questions may vary widely. One typical question you may have been asked in the past is, "Tell me about yourself." This is not an attempt to surface information about your hobbies or your upbringing. It is actually directed at finding out how you as a person are a match for the specific job for which they are hiring. Prepare an answer for this question by determining the employer's top 10 qualifications for the position. In fact, every answer you give in a job interview should tie back to those top 10 qualifications. If asked, "What is your greatest strength and greatest weakness?" share a strength the employer is asking for in the job posting. For a weakness, identify the qualification in which you have the least strength or experience. But if possible, have a plan for how you will or have already begun to strengthen that skill area. An example would be that an employer is asking for a proficiency in Microsoft Office Suite, which you have, but having a desired qualification or experience with Excel pivot tables, which you lack. It would be wise, even before the interview, to begin an online course in pivot tables. This would show the employer that you are self motivated and passionate about the job and know how to solve your own issues. If it involves something that you cannot prepare for in advance, then prepare a story about a time when you learned something similar quickly in the past. "Why do you want to work for us?" is essentially the same question as "Tell me about yourself." So tie your answer to the qualification for the job for which you're being interviewed. Probably the hardest question you might be asked is, "Why did you leave your last job?" It can be difficult to answer because of awkward situations, or you might have left the last employer under less than ideal terms. Instead of blaming your former employer or simply stating that you quit or were fired, explain your side of the story without going negative with the employer. The hiring manager will always identify more with your former manager than with you, and might expect to find you criticizing them in the future if they should hire you. A good answer instead might be, "There was a change in leadership and duties in the last job, so the job was no longer a fit for me. That's why I'm so interested in your position, which is an ideal fit for both my skills and experience, as well as my interests." "Why should I hire you?" Again, ask for the same response you gave for "Tell me about yourself," or "Why do you want to work for us?" Frame your answer to fit the top qualifications for the job. Occasionally, an employer will ask a seemingly silly question like, "What kind of tree would you be? What color would you be? What breakfast cereal would you be, or superhero?" And then ask you why you made the choice. Although this question seems off topic, it actually achieves two goals for the employer. First, it shows them how well you react to the unexpected, how adaptable you are in a pinch, but it's also what we would call fishing with dynamite. Fishing with dynamite is the employer hoping somehow that something good will surface from your answer. It actually matters very little what tree, color, cereal, or hero you choose, as long as you are able to relate your choice back to the qualifications for the job you are seeking For instance, you might say, I would be a willow tree because I weep with passion for the hurts and the needs that our customers struggle with. Or, I would be a cedar tree because when the wind blows, I don't break, I bend. I'm able to be flexible and adapt to changing situations. As you select your answer, be thinking what story that I prepared about my work experience will tie in best with this particular answer. And then spend most of your time talking about your qualifications for a specific job. But ideally, an employer is going to ask what we call a behavioral interview question. A behavioral interview question is one that asks you to tell about a time you used a relevant skill in your past employment. Examples of that would be describe a time you had conflicting deadlines and how you dealt with them. Or tell me about an important goal that you set for yourself and how you were able to accomplish it. Tell me about a time you had to deal with a difficult customer. Or even describe a document you created that you were proud of. In each case, they're looking for a story that enables them to visualize you doing the job well. Behavioral interviewing is based on the assumption that past behavior is the best predictor of future performance in a job. Since they cannot turn back time to observe you, they can't borrow Harry Potter's cloak of invisibility and Hermione Granger's time turner to invisibly go back and watch you doing work. Their best option then is for you to tell them a story that allows them to clearly visualize the performance of the skill. Employment psychologists tell us that once you get an employer to visualize you doing the job, they'll typically hire you. The best stories are what we would call star stories. A star story is a story that helps you explain your past performance by giving a real example, not a hypothetical one, not to say something like, what I usually do would, or what I typically do is, but to tell them what you actually did. The star story should base your skills on past accomplishments that you've actually achieved for an employer.
Your story should be star stories. We want you to become a star storyteller. The S stands for the situation that you were faced with in the story. The T is the task or job duties you were assigned in that particular situation. The A refers to the actions that you took in response to the needs of the situation or the customer. And R is the results. How did things turn out? You'd like it to be a story where you actually saved the day. The S in SAVE stands for skills, that you use skills that were as relevant as possible to the job for which you were applying. The A in SAVE stands for the accomplishments. What did you do that actually made a difference in the situation? And above all, what value did you bring to the employer because you accomplished what you did? This could be in terms of dollars saved or made. It could be in terms of a number of customers that were won or maintained. It could be in terms of time that you saved in processes. But what actual value did you bring? And you must tell the story with enthusiasm to show that it matters to you and that you have passion for the particular duties associated with that job. How do you pick your stories then that will be most appropriate to use for that specific job interview? Use what we call a validation T or T chart. You see one displayed on the screen. It simply is the capital letter T. On the one side, you will list the top 10 skills or qualifications the employer is seeking for that particular job. On the right side of the T, you will write stories about uses of skills in your work experience that demonstrate your competency for the job that you want. The best stories will demonstrate the skills required in the new job and will have big challenges that you faced Well executed skills or unique use of those skills and successful results in terms of what the employer desired to see happen. Once you have selected stories from your work experience, all you have to do is practice telling them. You don't need to memorize anything because, after all, these stories are simply little snippets of your actual life experience. But practice does help. Telling the story in a way that goes smoothly for you and in which you're able to communicate passion, stay on topic, and communicate well. So practice by telling the story first to yourself. You might want to use your phone to record a video of you telling the story so that you can review it and take note of things you might improve. Try telling the story to yourself by looking yourself in the eye in the mirror. That will really lock it into a deeper part of your memory that you won't forget when you're in a job interview and under the stress of the moment. Find a trusted friend, relative, somebody that has your trust enough that they will tell you the truth, and share the story with them so they can give you honest feedback about your body language, your facial expressions, and how you tell the story if you tell it in a way that they can easily understand. And then what you should do after you have implemented the things you learned through your practice is to come up with a key word for each story that will help you to remember it. When you come to the interview, you might be stressing enough to forget some of the things you'd like to say. But if you have keywords written down on a note page to bring to the interview, then when you look at those notes and those keywords, you'll remember the story and be able to tell it with confidence. And how do you open the interview? Well, first of all, even before you show up for the interview, you want to make sure that you dress for the job. That means putting your best foot forward by dressing one notch better than the person doing the job already. So you're making a good impression. As you approach the employer, you want to give them a good smile with great eye contact. Keep in mind your posture communicates. So lean toward them as you offer them a firm handshake. Leaning toward someone shows interest, which you can use not only when you're greeting them and shaking hands, but once you've taken your seat for the interview, after they ask the first question, if it's one that's significant, lean forward toward the interview panel or interviewer in order to show you're interested in the question and take it seriously. There are certain rules we want to keep in mind regardless of the question that might be asked. The first rule is, even if the employer does not say, tell me about a time, you want to tell them about a time. So if they say something like, so how are you with customers? Translate that in your mind to, tell me about a time when you dealt very well with a customer. Especially it could be a story about a difficult or challenging customer. All of your answers for interview questions should show how you added value to the employer's enterprise. Be truthful in all your answers without negativity. Here are some do's to keep in mind. Do turn your cell phone off, or better yet, leave it in your car and out of sight so you're not interrupted either before or during the interview by an unexpected phone call. Even the buzzer when you have your phone set on silent can be a big distraction and make a bad impression on an employer. You want to arrive 15 minutes early. That's considered to be on time for an interview. That means because things could go wrong either in your preparation or your drive to the interview site, you want to leave 30 minutes earlier than you think you need to leave. That will allow for a flat tire, being pulled over for a blinking tail light, or anything else that might take place. If you do arrive 45 minutes early, you can simply park a few blocks away from the employer, do something that helps you relax, or review your interview stories one more time so that you arrive exactly 15 minutes early. You want to treat everyone professionally associated with the interview, especially the receptionist. So greet the receptionist with a smile and maybe one brief, pleasant comment about her or her work area, and then sit down. And at that point, she can see you or he can see you reading notes, giving a professional impression that you're prepared for the interview and taking it seriously. If you are asked generic questions like, so, how do you feel about working overtime? Instead of just giving a quick answer, tell a behavioral interview story about a time when you did just that. Make sure to pick examples from situations that are as related to the new job as possible. That'll help the employer connect the dots between you and you doing the job well. If you do have a skill deficiency or a lack, a weakness, try to have an action plan to correct it, either before the interview or afterwards. And if it's not something you can correct or learn early or before the job should start, then have in your back pocket a how I learned quick story so they can understand your capacity to be able to do just that. There are certain things we advise you to not do in an interview. So here's a list of don'ts. Don't ever lie or mislead. It's pretty easy for an interviewer to see through that and to be able to tell by your nonverbal communication that you're not being honest with them. And don't give hypothetical answers about what you might do or what you usually do, but tell them what you have done. And don't, at the end of the interview, when they say, do you have any questions for us? Don't ask about anything that implies selfishness, like pay, benefits, childcare, or how did I do, which implies a lack of confidence in yourself. Don't accept coffee or water at the beginning of the interview. The reason for that is because in a typical interview, you have a very limited amount of time to tell your behavioral interview stories. Don't use it up for that. Of course, if the employer should say, I'm going to grab a coffee anyway, you might as well go with them. The time's already been taken up. And never, ever badmouth a previous employer. Interview formats vary significantly. The most common one in the past was a one-on-one in-person interview. But that interview allows you the opportunity to only offend one person. And even though you only have one person to please, it still has a certain amount of risk. Most human resource departments don't like one-on-one interviews. They like to have a second person there to be a witness that no discriminatory actions took place. A telephone interview is more difficult in some ways because you lack the facial expression and other nonverbal communication and are left only with your tone and pitch of voice to communicate passion and emotion. So be aware of those things. It sometimes helps to stand up, to smile, and even to dress up for a telephone interview. It somehow comes across in your tone of voice. Even if the employer simply calls you to set up an in-person interview, that telephone call might actually be considered an interview. Multi-stage or progressive interviews is where you interview with a small group or one individual, and then after doing well in the interview, you're asked to interview with an additional person or group, typically higher up in the organization. That is good news when it happens. Some interviews actually seem to be merely an informal discussion, such as an employer asking you to visit their work site. They might tell you they want to get your impressions of the work site, but typically what they're doing is trying to get your future coworkers' impressions of you. Be aware. Panel interviews are the most common, where you interview with a group of people. In that case, each person on the panel will ask questions one at a time. Don't assume the person asking the question has a particular interest in that question. It might be random. So be aware of their nonverbal communication, eye contact, expressions, to know if you have miscommunicated or given a wrong impression, or maybe said something they're a little confused about, so you can address that individual with good eye contact and clarify the matter for them. A group interview is very rare. Typically, it's for sales positions where they gather a large group of people in an auditorium or similar environment with one person on a platform or on a stage asking questions. And the purpose of that is to see who in the group is a leader or seems to be most interested in the topic. Demonstration and role play interviews are sometimes very valuable both for the job seeker to prove themselves and for the employer to get a real handle on how well you would do. In that case, you'd get to demonstrate a specific skill such as welding, or creating a spreadsheet, or interacting in a mock phone call with a customer. How do you close the interview? At the end of the interview, you want to make sure and leave with a good impression, because that last impression is a lasting impression. So have thoughtful questions when they ask you. So after we've asked you a lot of questions, what questions do you have for us? Be sure and have a question or two. And make sure that it's a question that demonstrates you've done some research about the employer and that you're very interested in the job. One question I like to ask is to say something like, after this interview, I'm all the more convinced that this is a perfect match for me. Assuming I'm selected, when can I start? Although many people prefer to ask questions like, can you tell me what your next steps are when you hope to make a decision, but don't expect to get an accurate answer at that time. Make sure that whatever you say expresses interest and passion for the job. Get a business card so you can email the employers later to thank them. If you're not able to do that, if you take the step early on in the interview when you sit down of writing their names down on your note paper, then you can go to the receptionist and say, I'd like to send a thank you note for the interview. I really enjoyed the experience. And when the receptionist asks you, well, who did you interview with? You can give them the names. That thank you that you give should be in the form of a business letter. That business letter allows you the opportunity to show some of your business skills. So the interview doesn't end with a handshake. It ends with creating a business letter as a PDF document and attaching it to an email. This gives you the opportunity through the letter that you write to show that you are a right fit for the position and that you have great passion and that you'd add value. Make sure and send that email the same day as the interview, but hopefully after their business hours, so that email will show up as the first thing in their inbox in the morning. You might also include in your letter one thing you wish you would have said about a specific question, but don't go into all the questions you ask. One should be sufficient. And then close with a passionate statement such as, I look forward very much to working with you in the future. This will give the employer a good feeling for who you are and that you're their kind of person. This concludes our lesson on successful interviewing. For additional resources to assist you in your job search, please check out the Career Quest application on WorkSourceSpokane.com. That's one word, WorkSourceSpokane.com. An easy registration with name and email is all that's needed to see a wealth of resources on every topic associated with your job search. Also, on WorkSourceWA.com, you will see a lot of resources, including resume help, cover letters, career tools, and resources that you can use to advance your job search. Thank you for attending today, and come to WorkSource anytime you have specific questions.
Thank you for watching this virtual workshop. If you have any questions about this course's content, please email the WorkSource Spokane workshop team at esdwsspokaneworkshopteam@esd.wa.gov.